My name is Margaret Cho. I'm 54 years old, and it's been over a decade since I last heard the word home without feeling a tight pull in my chest. When I left Denver and moved east, I didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a forwarding address, I didn't even look back. Because sometimes, the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people who once called you family. I used to work as a systems architect for a private cybersecurity firm that handled accounts for major banks and critical infrastructure. I wasn't just good at my job, I was the person they turned to when everything broke and no one else could figure out why. Inside the office, I was indispensable, but outside, I might as well have been invisible. My family hadn't spoken to me since 2009, so when my phone buzzed on a quiet Wednesday night last December, and I saw my cousin Connie's name light up, I hesitated before answering. "Margaret," she said gently, almost like she was afraid of scaring me off. "Aunt June and Uncle Ray, they're asking about you. They want you home for Christmas." I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, in the tiny apartment I'd made mine in Pittsburgh. Connie was the only one who had my new number. "Now?" I asked. "After all these years?" "They're asking around," she said. This time it feels real. I didn't respond. I just sat there as the silence wrapped around me. Not because I was overcome with emotiono, it was something different. It was the memories, pouring in like a flood. I could see my 12-year-old self, curled up in the corner of Dr. Keating's office, knees pulled to my chest, while she told my parents point blank, "Margaret isn't broken. She's just being ignored." I remember my mother scoffing, that thin smile on her face. We love both our children equally. But I knew that wasn't true. Not even close. My brother Jimmy was their star. Quarterback. Honor student, golden child. On his 16th birthday, he got a brand new car. 2 years later, I got a secondhand sweater that still smelled like someone else. Every Christmas, his gifts sparkled under the tree like trophies. Mine looked like leftovers someone forgot to wrap. But now sudden they wanted me back. They had no idea who I'd become. And they sure as hell weren't ready for what I was bringing home with me. They say the truth cuts deepest when it comes from those who raised you, and, in my case, that cut never quite healed. I spent most of my childhood in the shadows of Jimmy's spotlight. He was everything they ever wanted in a son, loud, charming, confident, always the first to be praised and the last to be blamed. I, on the other hand, became a fixture more than a daughter, like a lamp in the corner, useful but easy to ignore. While Jimmy basked in applause, I learned to disappear quietly. I was 13 when I first began to understand that my presence in that house was conditional, tethered to expectations I never asked to carry, and impossible standards I never agreed to. Thanksgiving that year was when it hit hardest. I remember the warmth of the turkey and the clinking of silverware being drowned out by my father's Tawasthis voice, steady and proud. To Jimmy, who's making us proud at Northwestern. Glasses raised. Cheers erupted, and just as I started to lower my gaze, my mother's voice cut through. "And as for Margaret," she added with a forced smile, "we're encouraging her to find something stable, something she can hold on to." The room went still for a beat before Uncle Ben chuckled. "We've got a dishwasher position open at the diner if she's looking." Laughter rolled around the table like thunder. Even my parents joined in. I didn't. What no one at that table knew, what they never bothered to ask, was that I had already secured a full-ride scholarship to one of the best tech universities in New York. Tuition, housing, even a stipend, it was all covered. I had applied in silence, wrote my essays under the dim glow of a desk lamp in the garage. And when the acceptance email came, I didn't tell a soul. I didn't owe them that. 2 weeks after that dinner, I packed my things into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. No one helped me. No one even noticed when I left. I boarded a Greyhound bus and watched my hometown shrink behind me through a foggy window, and for the first time, I breathed without that weight on my chest. Life in New York wasn't glamorous, it was hard, raw, and cold in every sense of the word. I waited tables in the evenings, studied through the night, and sometimes cried myself to sleep from exhaustion, not sadness, but every small win mattered. I graduated top of my class, earned the respect of mentors who saw more in me in a semester than my parents did in a lifetime, and landed a job with a cybersecurity firm before I even walked the stage at graduation. By 30, I was managing high-stakes integrations for international clients, By 31, I had led a multi-million-dollar rollout for a major bank's infrastructure. My bonus from that project could have bought me a sports car, a vacation home, or all the designer handbags my mother used to covet, but instead, I called a realtor. The condo was perfect. 2 bedrooms, exposed brick, a quiet neighborhood near the park in the heart of Oakbridge. It wasn't just property, it was a declaration. After everything they said I'd never become, I had become more than they could have imagined, and not for their approval, for my own peace. 2 weeks before Christmas, I hosted a small housewarming. No family. Just real friends, the ones who watched me fall apart during finals week, who stayed up debugging code with me, who held my hand when job rejections stung more than I cared to admit. We sat on floor cushions, eating Thai takeout off paper plates, drinking cheap wine, and laughing so hard the windows fogged. Lisa raised her glass and said, "To Margaret, the quiet one who never needed noise to make an impact." We all clinked glasses, and while I smiled, I felt the weight of what lay ahead. In a few days, I would drive back to the house that never truly felt like mine. But this time, I wasn't going back as the overlooked daughter or the charity case at the table. I was going back as a woman who built herself from broken pieces, who never begged for belonging, and who had finally learned that respect is never given freely, it's claimed. I didn't rise in fire or fury. There was no grand speech, no middle finger to the past. Just quiet steps forward, deliberate, steady, and silent enough that no one noticed until it was too late to ignore. And truthfully, I preferred it that way. It all started in high school, long before college applications or job offers, when I wandered past the bulletin board outside the math wing and saw a faded flyer barely hanging by a single thumbtack. Intro to Computer Science Club. Room 14. Thursdays after school. At the time, I had no plan beyond surviving each day without being mocked or forgotten. But something about the word intro gave me permission to try. I showed up late to the first meeting, expecting to be told I didn't belong. Instead, I was met with a smile from Mr. Calderon, the computer science teacher who ran the club. He didn't ask why I was there or what I knew, he just pointed me to an open chair beside a stack of outdated motherboards and said, "Pick one, let's see if we can bring it back to life." That room became my sanctuary. While Jimmy held court at school assemblies and football games, I sat cross-legged on linoleum floors, surrounded by old cables, cracked monitors, and the hum of processors slowly coming back to life under my fingers. It was the first time I felt truly seen not by people, but by logic, structure, and possibility. Code didn't lie. It didn't gossip behind your back or compare your worth to someone else's sit. Either worked or it didn't. And when it did, it was beautiful. By junior year, I was rebuilding PCs from scrap parts, writing scripts to automate class schedules, and staying after school long after the custodians had turned off the hallway lights. Mr. Calderon once pulled me aside and said, "Margaret, don't let small minds shrink your vision. You've got something rare. Protect it." I didn't tell him then, but that became my mantra. I applied to Columbia Tech quietly without telling my family. I wrote my personal essay in the back of the library, my laptop balanced on a cracked windowsill while snow tapped gently against the glass. When the acceptance email arrived, I stared at the screen for nearly an hour, tears blurring the words full scholarship, tuition, housing, stipend. I didn't show my parents. I didn't want their approval. I wanted distance. The day I left for New York, I boarded the bus with a single suitcase and $94 in my checking account. My parents never called. Jimmy didn't even notice I was gone. I arrived at a dorm in Brooklyn that smelled like dust and industrial cleaner, with walls thin enough to hear your neighbor breathe, and floors warped from decades of snow boots and spilled ramen. Still, it was mine. The next 4 years were a blur of exhaustion and quiet victories. I waited tables during lunch rushes, studied until sunrise, and sometimes fell asleep with textbooks pressed to my chest. When I failed, I learned. When I stumbled, I rebuilt. And when I graduated, I didn't walk across the stage for applause. I walked because I had earned every single step. I landed my first job 2 weeks before commencement as a junior back-end developer at an independent cybersecurity firm in Jersey City. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and I threw myself into it. I didn't just meet expectations, I dismantled them. I solved problems that teams twice my size couldn't even identify, rewrote infrastructure that had been patched for years, and gained the respect of engineers who initially wouldn't look me in the eye. By 28, I was leading development teams for sensitive financial systems. By 30, I was the key architect behind a platform that would later be adopted by a global banking network. And at 31, after completing the final stage of the project, I was handed a performance bonus large enough to fundamentally change the trajectory of my life. I didn't buy anything flashy. No sports car, no European cruise. I called a realtor. Within a month, I closed on a brownstone condo in Oak Bridgetwoe bedrooms, tall windows, restored hardwood floors, and enough quiet to hear myself think. I stood in that empty space with keys in hand, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe. I threw a small housewarming, nothing fancy. Just the people who mattered, friends who had become family, colleagues who saw my talent without needing a backstory, and Lisa, who brought her signature bottle of $10 wine and toasted, to Margaret, who turned silence into power. We laughed that night, and as I looked around the room, surrounded by unpacked boxes and people who didn't need me to prove anything, I realized I had built something more valuable than success. I had built peace. But as the laughter faded and my friends left one by one, I sat on the edge of my new bed and stared at my suitcase half-packed again. Christmas was in a week, and I had promised myself I would go back. Not because I needed closure, but because I no longer feared what waited on the other side of that old creaking door. They didn't know what I had built, but they were about to. The drive back to that house felt longer than 6 hours should. I left early in the morning, the roads still wet from overnight snow, and the silence in my car was broken only by the low hum of the heater and the rustling of carefully wrapped gifts sliding gently on the passenger seat. Each package was selected with intention, nothing extravagant, but personal, thoughtful, chosen not out of duty, but as an olive branch I wasn't sure I needed to extend. By the time I reached the old neighborhood in West Haven, the sky had darkened with thick winter clouds. The street looked smaller than I remembered, the homes aging in ways time rarely forgives: cracked driveways, leaning mailboxes, paint curling at the corners like burnt parchment. My parents' house sat at the end of the block, still pale yellow, though faded to something between beige and neglect. The porch light flickered, same as it did when I was 16. Nothing had changed, and yet everything inside me had. I stood at the door for a moment longer than I should have, keys still clenched in my hand, before pressing the doorbell. The sound echoed inside, followed by muffled steps and hushed voices. When the door opened, my mother blinked in surprise, like she had half believed I wouldn't come. "Margaret," she said, voice catching. "It's really you." She pulled me in for a brief, stiff hug the kind strangers offer at funerals. "You look different." Stepping inside was like inhaling memory. Furniture frozen in time, the same dusty polish on the coffee table, and that ever-present bowl of potpourri that had long since lost its scent. The living room was full cousins, aunts, neighbors I barely remembered, all of whom turned to stare as if I had walked in carrying a scandal on my shoulders. "Well, look who decided to show up," someone muttered. "Wearing sweats?" Another snorted. I looked down at my outfit-tailored black slacks, a wool coat from a boutique designer, polished boots. Quiet elegance, clearly lost on them. And then Jimmy appeared, as if summoned by the spotlight. He strolled out of the kitchen, all teeth and swagger, one arm around a woman I assumed was his wife. "Everyone, this is Callie," he announced proudly, "and this," he added, placing a hand on her stomach, "is our first." Smiles rippled through the room like a wave of applause. "Congratulations," I offered, sincere but subdued. He looked me over like an appraiser considering pawnshop goods. "Still hiding behind screens somewhere?" he smirked. "Or did you finally open that Etsy store?" I let out a breath. "I work in tech," I said simply. "Cybersecurity infrastructure, large-scale systems." His eyes narrowed, amusement quickly returning. "So, like fixing printers? Resetting passwords?" The snickers came from behind me, low and familiar. My jaw tightened, but I didn't flinch. I had walked into this theater fully aware of the script. "Something like that," I replied and moved toward the hallway. My mother called after me, "Margaret, can you leave your bag by the stairs? Jimmy's using your old room as his office now. You'll be sleeping on the couch." Of course I would be. The evening unfolded like slow poison. I was greeted with condescending small talk disguised as family concern. Uncle Greg asking if I was still doing computer stuff. Aunt Marie offering to connect me with her friend's son who does social media. At dinner, I was placed at the far end of the table, next to the kitchen door, as if proximity to the exit matched my relevance. Jimmy, naturally, sat center stage, arms flying as he described his visionary starter-pan idea so vague and derivative it sounded like a Shark Tank outtake. "We just need the seed funding," he explained, gesturing animatedly. 200 grand to get things rolling. It's going to revolutionize the marketplace." My father leaned in, nodding like he was hearing gospel. "We're working on it," my mother added, patting Jimmy's hand. "Family helps family." I said nothing, just watched as the same hands that once offered me thrift store gifts now reached for their wallets at the mere promise of his ambition. After dinner, my mother handed me a folded blanket, the message as clear as ever. "You don't belong here. Not really, not unless you're needed, and not unless you're silent." Christmas morning arrived like a ritual I no longer believed in. Jimmy and Callie came down the stairs first, glowing, laughing, tearing open their gifts with theatrical delight. Their pile towered across the floor watches, designer coats, monogrammed baby things. My turn came. I passed out my gifts wrapped with care, each one matched to the recipient with a memory in mind. My mother unwrapped a leather bag and gasped, "Margaret, this is beautiful." Then came my turn. An awkward shuffle. Heads turned toward one another. My mother's eyes widened. "Oh no, Margaret, we completely forgot." Jimmy burst out laughing. "Just like old times," he said, elbowing Callie. "Don't cry this time, sis. You're a grown-up now, right?" But I didn't cry. Not this time. Something inside me shifted, not pain, not anger, just a kind of clarity I hadn't felt before. I reached into my purse, pulled out my keys, and held them up. "What's that?" my mother asked, brows furrowed. I turned them slowly, the brushed metal catching the morning light. "Keys," I said calmly, "to my new place. Closed on it last week." Silence fell like a curtain. "You bought an apartment?" my father asked, confusion and disbelief thick in his voice. "With money?" my mother added, barely masking the suspicion. "From my job," I said, still holding their gaze. "My company just licensed a security system I designed to an international financial firm. My share came out to about $150,000, before taxes." The room froze. You could have heard the snow fall outside. Jimmy's jaw slackened, and Callie's eyes darted to his, unsure what to say. My parents stared at me like I'd been living a double life, and in some ways, I had just not the kind they could comprehend. "That's not possible," my mother whispered, as though speaking louder would make it more real. "It is," I replied softly, "and it's mine." After that stunned silence, something in the room shifted, but not in a way that felt comforting. The air didn't soften. It sharpened. My mother stood up first, voice suddenly warm, almost sugary. "Sweetheart," she said, stepping closer, "why didn't you tell us? We're just so proud of you." Her hands fluttered toward me as if she were reaching for some invisible thread to stitch us back together. My father chimed in next, clearing his throat as he turned to Jimmy. "You hear that, son? Your sister works with Fortune 500 companies. That's impressive, really impressive." Jimmy's smile had vanished entirely. His jaw was clenched, eyes unreadable, and Callie sat beside him, lips pressed tight as she leaned toward him, whispering something I couldn't hear. I didn't need to. I could read it in his face, the confusion, the envy, and beneath it all, a subtle panic that the order of things, the hierarchy he'd always ruled, had suddenly collapsed. Mom turned to me again, now almost breathless. "Tell us more about this apartment. 2 bedrooms? Is it near the city?" Her voice rose with forced enthusiasm. "We should visit sometime. It would be so lovely to see where you live." And just like that, the years of silence were conveniently forgotten. The dismissals, the backhanded jokes, the absence at every milestone. None of it mattered now that they had confirmation. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But it wasn't curiosity or love in their eyes, it was calculation. "I've got a long drive ahead," I said, walking toward the stairs to grab my coat. "You just got here," my father said, stepping in front of me. "Let's talk more, catch up as a family." As I zipped my bag, I could hear whispers rushed. Urgent, not meant for me, but not exactly hidden either. I knew this part. I'd seen it coming. When I returned to the living room, my mother and father were standing by the fireplace. Jimmy seated with his hands steepled, a practiced calm returning to his expression. "Before you leave," my dad began, We were hoping to talk with you about something important. I didn't sit. I didn't smile. I waited. Jimmy's startup, my mother said, glancing at her son as if presenting a wounded bird. It has incredible potential. He just needs a little help to get it off the ground. And, well, she trailed off, looking at me with hopeful eyes. Jimmy leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It's a solid investment, he said smoothly, voice regaining that confident tone he always used when he was about to charm someone into giving him what he wanted. You'd be coming in at the ground floor, $200,000 to get things rolling, and you'd have equity, real ownership. I let the number hang in the air for a moment, not because I needed to think about it, but because I wanted them to hear it again in their own heads. 200,000, I repeated quietly. That's what you need. Jimmy nodded. With what you're making, it's nothing, right? I looked at my parents, who once left me to figure out college on my own, while they funneled every dime and ounce of pride into Jimmy's future. At my brother, who had mocked me with every word and glance since we were kids. And at Callie, who now stared at me as if I were an ATM with a pulse. No, I said, my voice even. The smile on Jimmy's face vanished again. My mother's hand twitched toward me. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not giving you the money, I said, turning toward the door. But we're family, my father said, as if that word had the power to erase everything that came before. I turned back slowly, locking eyes with him. Where was family when you told me to move out the day after graduation? When you paid for Jimmy's tuition and left me to patch together loans and night shifts? That was different, my mother said quickly. We didn't have the means back then. You had enough for him, I replied. He showed promise, she snapped before catching herself, her expression turning pale. I mean, we just thought work would be a better fit for you. I picked up my bag. You selfish brat, Jimmy exploded, rising to his feet. After everything this family did for you. What did you do? I asked, voice low but unwavering. Raise me? Feed me? That's parenting, not charity. And even then, you made sure I knew exactly where I stood. The room buzzed with anger, confusion, and indignation, but I didn't stay to soak in their outrage. I walked to the door, hand on the knob, as my mother called after me one last time. You'll regret this. I won't, I said without turning back, and I meant it. By the time I reached the freeway, my phone was lighting up with calls from my parents, texts from Jimmy, voicemails laced with guilt and carefully phrased accusations. I stopped at a gas station outside New Haven, sat in the car, and blocked every number. Back in Oakbridge, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the city lights shimmer beyond my balcony. My phone buzzed again this time. It was Lisa. Heard what happened. Sorry about them. Don't be, I texted back. This was the best gift they've ever given me. Freedom. She sent a laughing emoji. Your mom's telling everyone you're ungrateful. Let her, I replied. They can keep their stories. I've started living mine. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept without hearing old voices in my head. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my parents wasn't peace, it was the storm gathering its next gust. It didn't take long for their attempts to reach me to resume, but they didn't come directly. Instead, the messages trickled through the cracks of extended family cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, former neighbors, even distant church acquaintances who suddenly remembered I existed. The narrative had shifted. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was now the ungrateful one, the rich one. The selfish one who refused to help her brother build something great. They never mentioned the years they'd forgotten me, or the way they laughed. When I scraped together my life from nothing, they only repeated one message. Margaret turned her back on family. I blocked them all, except for Connie, me cousin, the only one who had ever spoken to me like a person instead of a problem. She called one afternoon while I was prepping a slide deck for a conference on AI-driven authentication models. Her voice was tired, exasperated. Jesus, Margaret, your mom's telling anyone who'll listen that you've gone cold, that you abandoned everyone. I leaned against the counter and let the weight of it roll over me like rain on a windshield. Let her, I said quietly. They were never really mine to abandon. She's saying you forgot where you came from, Connie added. But that was the thing I hadn't forgotten. I remembered every moment. Every time I was told to keep quiet so Jimmy could shine. Every time I ate in my room while they cheered him on from the dinner table. I remembered it all. And I had left not to erase the past, but to protect the person I became despite it. "Are you really okay cutting them off?" Connie asked, her voice softer now. "I cut them off 8 years ago," I said. "This just made it official." And I meant it, because closure doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it comes in silence, in choosing not to answer, in not reacting when the past comes knocking again, wearing new clothes and the same old motives. In the months that followed, I focused on my work and on the life I had built. I was promoted again lead systems architect for a new AI-integrated security initiative, and the recognition was earned, not granted. My team respected my leadership because it was quiet, steady, and rooted in substance, not performance. My name was on patents now. My code protected millions of users. I didn't need the world to see it, I just needed to know it was real. And then came Ethan. We met at a coffee shop near my office, a freelance designer with soft eyes and a quiet confidence that didn't need to prove itself. We started slowly, over shared coffee breaks and walks through the park near my condo, and over time, we began trading pieces of our past, like puzzle pieces that no longer fit their original boxes. He too had walked away from a family that refused to see him. He understood what it meant to rebuild without applause. With Ethan, I didn't need to perform, explain, or edit myself. We cooked together, worked side by side on creative projects, mapped out a trip to Japan, and learned enough of the language to not feel like tourists. It was the kind of slow, steady companionship I never knew I needed, and exactly the kind I never saw growing up. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Callie were still living with my parents. The startup had never launched. The pitch had faded into another dinner table idea. My mother's new version of events painted herself as a victim of my ambition. At family gatherings, they would say I'd changed, that I had money but no heart, that success had made me forget who I was. But they were wrong. I hadn't changed. I had returned to the person I was always meant to be before the shame, before the silence, before the hierarchy that made me feel like a burden in my own home. I hadn't forgotten who I was. I had just stopped believing their version of me. They turned my childhood bedroom into a nursery. Connie told me, hesitant, as if it might sting. But it didn't. That room had never really belonged to Minot in memory, not in meaning. My real home was here, in Oakbridge, in a space I chose, with people who chose me back. They still tried to reach out through second cousins, through old family friends. One day, I got a voicemail from Aunt Marie. "Family is forever, Margaret, don't forget that." But by then, I had already rewritten what family meant. Family to me is earned, it's chosen. And it never, ever comes with a price tag attached. Last week, I was promoted again head of engineering, top percentile salary. A celebration unfolded in our usual spot, fairy lights overhead and wine glasses clinking with real joy. Lisa teased, "Your mom probably sensed the bank account bump in her sleep." We laughed, but there was no venom in it, just release. Later that night, Ethan brought champagne onto the balcony. "We should buy a house," I said, surprising even myself. "With space. A yard, maybe a dog." My phone buzzed again. Connie. "Mom saw your vacation photos. She said it figures you'd rather fly across the world than help your own brother." I smiled. "Good," I replied. "Maybe she's finally starting to understand." And if you've ever been made to feel small in the place where you should have felt safest, if you've ever outgrown the lies they told about your worth, and if you've ever walked away and learned to call that healing, not guilt, then you're not alone. Tell me what you walked away from. Tell me what you built instead. Drop a comment, because your story matters and someone else out there might need it as much as you once did. And if any part of mine speaks to you, hit subscribe. You deserve to feel seen.